Static hum fades in, mixed with faint Morse code beeps, then silence. They told me my antenna ruined the neighborhood's beauty. They thought they could fine me into silence. But when the HOA tried to take away my voice, I found another frequency, one they couldn't control. The night I started broadcasting their own bylaws was the night Pleasant Valley Meadows would never be the same. If you love stories where ordinary people fight back against HOA tyranny, hit subscribe now and join us for more true suburban justice stories. There's a kind of silence that hums. Not the peaceful quiet of a library or the still air after a snowfall, but an electric, vibrating hush that feels alive. That was the silence that filled my spare bedroom each night, the one my wife, Sarah, generously let me transform into a ham radio shack. Inside, blinking lights from half a dozen metal boxes glowed like a miniature city at night. Each one whispered to the airwaves, waiting for something distant and unseen to whisper back. For me, radio wasn't a hobby. It was a doorway, a lifeline from my cul-de-sac prison to the rest of the world. And that night, when the voice from the South Sandwich Islands broke through the static, I felt like an explorer discovering fire. My heart pounded as I responded, my hands steady over the dials. 15 seconds of connection with a voice thousands of miles away. It felt like touching infinity. That antenna in my backyard, a sleek 25-foot aluminum spear, wasn't just metal and bolt. It was my Statue of Liberty. My Eiffel Tower. I'd spent a weekend digging, mixing concrete, and raising it like a monument to invisible world. It was barely noticeable, a thin silver line against the oak tree behind it. Harmless, elegant. When I shut down my rig that night, the house smelled of garlic bread. Sarah was plating lasagna, and I remember thinking, this is perfect, until I saw the envelope in her hand. Beige. Expensive paper. The kind that means trouble. It's here, she said flatly. I didn't have to ask who sent it. The logo in the corner, a minimalist leaf motif, was all I needed to see. Pleasant Valley Meadows Homeowners Association. Inside, in cold, crisp language, it declared war. Unauthorized structural modification to a metallic radio antenna. Violation of Article 6, Section 4B. You have 14 days to remove the structure or face daily fines. 14 days. The air left my lungs. My proud, harmless antenna, outlawed for aesthetic harmony. Aesthetic harmony. Two of the most terrifying words ever printed on paper. That was the moment I realized what I was up against. Not just a group of neighbors, but a machine. A quiet, smiling, pastel monster powered by bureaucracy and boredom. And at its head, Brenda Donaldson, the HOA president. The woman with the golf cart, the ruler, and the smug smile that measured lives in inches and ordinances. That night I didn't sleep. I stared out the window at the silver pole in the backyard, proud, defiant, doomed. Somewhere in that humming silence, a decision formed. If Brenda wanted a war, she was going to get one. And I had just the frequency for it. Mornings in Pleasant Valley Meadows were always the same. The hum of sprinklers, the faint drone of leaf blowers, and, if you listened closely, the low electric whine of Brenda Donaldson's compliance cart making its rounds, the sound of authority on 4 silent wheels. By sunrise, the neighborhood had already surrendered to her invisible hand. Grass trimmed exactly 3 inches. Garbage cans rolled out only after 7 a.m. Wreaths hung on doors precisely within the approved seasonal window. Nothing was out of place, until I put up my antenna. That morning, I spotted her before she spotted me. 3 houses down, kneeling in Peterson's front yard with a plastic ruler, measuring a single blade of grass. The man looked like someone awaiting a diagnosis. Brenda was in her usual pastel pink polo, khaki shorts, and sun visor, her hair so stiff it could deflect a golf ball. I approached her, clutching the beige envelope that had ruined my evening. "Morning, Brenda." She didn't look up right away, just announced to Peterson, 3.25 inches. The bylaws state 3 maximum. I'll give you till Tuesday. Then she rose, brushed imaginary dirt from her knee, and finally acknowledged me with the kind of smile that could cut glass. "Frank," she said sweetly, "what a surprise." I held up the letter. "I got this. About the antenna." Her smile didn't falter. "Ah yes. The apparatus. It's not approved. It's a ham radio antenna, Brenda. It's federally regulated. The FCC protects." She lifted a manicured hand and stopped me. "Oh, I'm very familiar with the rules, Frank. Your metal stick transmits. It's not covered. Our community has standards to maintain." She turned her gaze toward my backyard, her nose wrinkling as if catching the scent of rebellion. "If we allow one antenna, Frank, what's next? Windmills? Personal cell towers? Gargoyles?" It was like watching someone turn logic into origami and fold it into nonsense. "But it's practically invisible," I protested. "It's not." She tilted her head. "Rules are rules. 14 days. I'm sure you understand." Then she patted my arm with that condescending pity reserved for children and fools, turned, and drove away, her golf cart humming like a judgmental wasp. I stood there, clutching the notice. The war had begun, and I'd already lost the first battle. Over the next week, I did everything by the book. Filed a formal appeal. Gathered documents from the FCC. Took photos showing the antenna barely visible behind the oak tree. I even scheduled a video call with the Architectural Review Committee, Brenda and 2 identical women who looked like carbon copies of her personality. Let's call them Brenda 2 and Brenda 3. They listened with polite, empty expressions while I spoke passionately about science, communication, and community service. When I finished, Brenda 2 unmuted her mic and said, "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Miller. We find the structure out of compliance with Article 6. Click. Meeting over. 15 minutes of democracy, undone in seconds. That night, I sat in my radio shack staring at the silent lights on my equipment. The same blinking city that once promised adventure now looked like a morgue of lost signals. I'd built something beautiful, and bureaucracy had killed it. When sleep wouldn't come, I wandered into the kitchen, poured a bowl of cereal, and stared at the beige binder Sarah had left on the counter, the HOA bylaws. 372 pages of pure misery. So I read. And the deeper I went, the stranger it got. Rules about mailbox heights, fence stains, even lumens per square foot for Christmas lights. Every paragraph another layer of absurdity. Then I found it. Article 4. Animal husbandry. No livestock, poultry, or non-domesticated animals shall be kept on any lot, except for 2 pot-bellied pigs, under 75 pounds each, provided they are leashed when in common areas. 2 pigs. Leashed. I started laughing. Not the normal kind, the exhausted, half-delirious kind that bubbles up when the universe tips over into absurdity. Sarah peeked in, confused. "You okay?" "Fine," I said between laughs. Just realizing I could own 2 75-pound pigs, but not a silent antenna. And that's when it happened, that spark. That tiny, rebellious click in my brain that turned frustration into inspiration. If Brenda wanted to silence me, fine. I'd play by the rules. Every single ridiculous one. And I'd make sure everyone in Pleasant Valley Meadows heard every word of them. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I went online. And I started planning my revenge. One broadcast frequency at a time. The human brain has a breaking point, a line between obedience and defiance. For me, that line was printed in beige ink on 372 pages of HOA bylaws. The more I read, the more absurd it became. There were rules about paint sheen, shrub height, and mailbox flag colors. There were exact lumen limits for Christmas lights. There was even a clause on what percentage of your lawn could be decorative gravel. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a dictatorship disguised as landscaping perfection. I had followed their process, appealed, reasoned, lost. But as I sat there surrounded by papers, the late-night hum of silence pressing down like a lid, a new kind of energy started to build inside me. They couldn't stop me from talking. They couldn't silence ideas. And, thanks to a very small loophole buried deep in federal code, they couldn't stop me from broadcasting, at least, not in the way they thought. I dove into research with the manic focus of a man possessed. Low-power FM transmitters. Signal strength regulations. The Federal Communications Commission's Part 15 rules. The same ones that allowed churches to broadcast to their parking lot. Legal, contained, harmless. I could build my own radio station. A quiet rebellion, hiding in plain sight. Within days, the plan was alive. A small black transmitter arrived in a plain Amazon box. It was laughably tiny, smaller than a deck of cards, but to me, it was a weapon of poetic justice. That night, when the house went dark and Sarah was asleep, I climbed into the attic. Dust motes swirled in my flashlight beam as I uncoiled a 30-inch wire antenna and taped it to a roof beam. Hidden. Invisible. I ran a cable down through the ceiling and into my radio shack. My pulse quickened as I plugged everything in: laptop, microphone, transmitter. The glowing frequency display read 88.7 FM. A perfect blank spot on the local radio dial. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the mic stand. I spoke softly at first, testing levels. My own voice came back through the small radio speaker beside me. Deep, resonant, alive. It was like hearing a ghost. My ghost. Now I needed a name. Every revolution needs a flag, and every broadcast needs a call sign. I leaned into the microphone, feeling the thrill of the forbidden. Broadcasting from somewhere deep within the aesthetically harmonious confines of Pleasant Valley Meadows, this is WHA, the voice of the valley. I added a faint echo to my voice, a ripple of reverb that gave it weight. The sound filled the room. It was ridiculous. It was glorious. But a station needs programming. It needs content. So I gave it exactly what they didn't want the world to hear. I opened the HOA binder, flipped to a random section, and began reading in my best movie trailer narrator voice. Article 7, Mailboxes. All mailboxes shall be of the approved T1 or T2 rural style, mounted on a 4x4-inch post extending precisely 42 inches above the ground. My tone was solemn, heroic, absurdly serious. I added a dramatic orchestral sting between each clause, a slow rumble of violins rising like the soundtrack to a thriller. As the words poured out, I started to laugh. Not out loud, just a deep, satisfied grin. It was rebellion disguised as compliance. I wasn't breaking the law. I wasn't defaming anyone. I was simply reading the rules. When I finished the first broadcast, I shut off the mic, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet. The air smelled faintly of solder and coffee. My heart was racing like I'd just committed a crime, but in reality I'd done nothing wrong. Not legally. Not morally. And then I saw movement outside my window. My neighbor, Dave, was standing by his car, head cocked, listening to something. A faint smile spread across his face as he turned the dial on his car radio. He could hear me. The realization hit like a thunderclap. My voice was in the air, traveling invisibly through every cul-de-sac and culvert of Pleasant Valley Meadows. Through open garage doors. Across manicured lawns. Over every beige fence that Brenda Donaldson had ever approved. For the first time since my antenna went silent, the static had purpose. The next night, I refined it. Added sound effects, the creak of a gavel, the shuffle of pages, the low hum of broadcast ambience. Then came the opening jingle, a tongue-in-cheek homage to talk radio. You're listening to WHA, where bylaws come alive. It was absurd. It was perfect. And it was only the beginning. Within 3 nights, my private protest had become a nightly ritual. Each evening, I poured a coffee, dimmed the lights, and began another reading, each one more dramatic than the last. Mailboxes, lawn maintenance, trash receptacle regulations. I turned the most soul-crushing text ever written into a theatrical event. Somewhere, I imagined Brenda in her living room, sipping decaf and frowning at her radio, wondering why her own bylaws sounded like a dystopian prophecy. I didn't know if anyone else was listening, but that didn't matter. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't powerless. I had found my voice again, on 88.7 FM, right between the static and the silent. And somewhere out there, I knew Brenda would soon find it too. The signal was spreading, and I was just getting started. The first real sign that my broadcasts were working didn't come through the airwaves. It came through the blinds. By the end of that week, I noticed a pattern. Cars were idling in driveways just before 8 p.m., engines off, radios on. The neighborhood, that polished, rule-bound grid of perfection, had developed a pulse. Some listened with the windows cracked, others through headphones. People were actually tuning in. What began as petty revenge was turning into something bigger, a quiet, secret rebellion wrapped in laughter. But revolutions, no matter how small, never stay secret for long. By Friday night, I had perfected my act. A new broadcast, a new target. Tonight's reading was a dramatic dive into Article 9. Driveways and walkways, complete with thunderous orchestral stings and mock courtroom sound effects. I leaned into the microphone, savoring every word as if I were narrating a historical epic. Hairline fractures of less than 1/4 inch are permissible, I intoned gravely. But anything greater constitutes a gateway to suburban decay. The absurdity made it all the more beautiful. Each rule was a self-parody, and I was just the messenger. Halfway through the segment, I caught a flicker of red and blue light reflecting off my living room wall. Then the knock came. Firm. Rhythmic. The kind of knock that carried authority. My stomach dropped. I opened the door to find 2 officers standing on the porch. One older, face weathered by experience, the other a young rookie trying too hard to look serious. Behind them, a golf cart sat at the curb. Brenda Donaldson, arms folded, lips pressed into a hard line, sat in the passenger seat like a queen demanding justice. I stepped aside, feigning calm. The older officer's name tag read Miller. A coincidence that felt like cosmic irony. He sighed before speaking, the sigh of a man who'd been here too many times for too many petty suburban wars. He explained that they'd received a complaint about a broadcast disturbance. Someone, he didn't need to say who, had reported a man using radio equipment to harass his community. My heart thudded, but I kept my face neutral. Then came the question. Sir, are you by any chance reading your HOA bylaws live on the FM frequency 88.7? For a moment I almost laughed. It sounded insane out loud. But it was true. The officer's tone was tired, not hostile. He'd already called in a favor, someone who understood FCC regulations. And the result? Technically, I wasn't breaking any law. My transmitter was legal under Part 15 power limit. The content wasn't obscene. I wasn't naming anyone directly. It was all public record. Perfect compliance. Weaponized boredom. Brenda's worst nightmare. The rookie tried to keep a straight face but failed. A smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. Even the older officer seemed torn between duty and sympathy. He rubbed his temples and said quietly, "Look, this isn't illegal. Just, maybe keep the dramatic music down after 10? He turned, walked to his cruiser, and left. Brenda sat frozen in her golf cart, her perfect world cracking in real time. For once, her power didn't reach far enough. When the lights faded and the night swallowed the cul-de-sac again, I closed the door, leaning against it in disbelief. I just faced the full might of suburban authority and won. But victory had consequences. The next morning, the first envelope appeared. Another beige rectangle, delivered with surgical precision. Violation notice. Trash receptacles placed at curb at 6:50 a.m. Bylaws stipulate 7 a.m. earliest. Fine, $25. The next day. One dandelion observed in front yard. Article 8, Section 1C violation. Fine, $50. The day after that. Driveway crack, 18 inches long, 1/3 inch wide. Structural deficiency. Immediate remediation required. Fine. $200, plus $100 per day until repaired. She was striking back the only way she knew how, one petty infraction at a time. But Brenda didn't realize what she was really doing. Each envelope she sent wasn't punishment. It was content. Material for my next broadcast. That night, the intro music was triumphant, almost cinematic. My voice came alive through the static. Good evening, rebels, patriots, and dandelion sympathizers. Tonight, we bring you breaking news from the front lines of the war on aesthetic disharmony. I held the letters up to the microphone one by one, reading them aloud like royal decrees. Each violation was another brick in her absurd empire. Each fine, another punchline. And for the first time, I wasn't just laughing alone. Listeners began to respond. Notes on my porch. Small gift. 6 packs of beer, a bag of gourmet coffee. One anonymous card simply read, Article 5, Trash Receptacles. Hilarious. Keep going. The resistance had begun. The neighborhood was choosing sides. Some still clung to Brenda's order, the promise of uniformity. But others, quiet, tired homeowners who'd been fined for the color of their mulch or the position of a flower pot, began to smile when they passed me on the street. I had become something unexpected. Not just a troublemaker. Not even a rebel. But a voice. The voice of every silent homeowner who'd ever swallowed frustration behind a polite smile. The voice of the valley. And deep down, I knew Brenda wouldn't stop here. She was regrouping. Plotting. Because in Pleasant Valley Meadows, order always fights back. And the next strike would be hers. By the end of the week, Brenda's paper war had reached a rhythm, one beige envelope a day, each more ridiculous than the last. The fines weren't meant to hurt my wallet, they were meant to exhaust my spirit, to bury me under the weight of small humiliations until I broke and begged for peace. But I had something she didn't, an audience. Every violation she mailed became another act in the unfolding drama of the voice of the valley. Still, one fine I couldn't ignore. The driveway crack. $200 up front, $100 a day until fixed. Even rebellion had to obey gravity, and concrete doesn't patch itself. So I called the first contractor I found online, Sal's Concrete. We fix your cracks. He arrived in a truck that looked like it had survived 3 hurricanes and a divorce. The logo was spray-painted, the tailgate dented. The kind of vehicle Brenda's HOA manual would classify as unsightly. Sal was built like the job, thick, steady, covered in dust. He crouched, kicked the crack with his boot, and nodded as if diagnosing a wound. He asked if the HOA was on me. When I said yes, his laugh rolled across the street like thunder. That's when he recognized me. The bylaw guy, he said, grinning. Heard you over on Chestnut last week. Mailbox rules nearly killed me. Funniest thing I ever heard. For a moment, the rebellion had a face. A comrade in coveralls. As he worked, Sal told me stories. Decades of dealing with HOA royalty. The woman fined for planting unapproved tulip. The man who was cited for leaving his snow shovel visible in June. Every tale ended with the same shrug. They live for it, man. It's a power trip. Then he paused, leaned on his shovel, and said something that changed everything. Built Brenda's deck last summer. Fancy composite stuff. Had to special order the sealant she wanted. Pretty sure it's not on your official list. I looked up sharply. Not on the list? He nodded. And I never saw a county permit. Asked about it, she said she'd handle the paperwork. Yeah, right. For a moment, time stopped. The image of Brenda, queen of compliance, measuring grass with a ruler, collided with the thought of her own unapproved deck. The hypocrisy was almost elegant. When Sal left, I paid him, slipped him an extra $50, and called it consulting. That night, my Radio Shack became a war room. The glow of my monitors painted the walls in cold light as I pulled up the county's public records portal. The interface looked like it had been designed in the 1990s by someone allergic to usability. I typed in her address, 45 Magnolia Court. Search results flickered in. A plumbing permit for a water heater replacement. An electrical upgrade the next year. But nothing for a deck. The silence on the screen was deafening. I cross-checked the HOA's digital binder. Appendix C, Approved Building Materials. Scrolled the list. Oakwood Seal Pro 9000. The brand Sal had mentioned wasn't there. 2 violations. Both hers. The woman who fined me for a dandelion had built an illegal structure in her own backyard. I sat back, the hum of my computer filling the room. It wasn't anger I felt, it was something colder, cleaner. Justice sharpening its blade. The annual HOA meeting was in 4 days. Every homeowner would be there. And for the first time, I wouldn't be reading bylaws into a microphone. I'd be reading evidence. The next nights were a blur of preparation. Between broadcasts, I collected screenshots, photographs, and printouts. I rehearsed in front of the mirror, shaping each sentence into a measured blow. The broadcasts grew quieter, almost solemn. My listeners sensed it. The notes left on my porch changed tone, from laughter to solidarity. One read simply, "End her reign." When the night of the meeting arrived, the air itself felt charged. Cars lined both sides of Arbor Lane. People who hadn't attended in years showed up in pressed shirts and cautious smiles. It was as if the entire neighborhood could smell revolution on the breeze. I tucked the USB drive into my pocket, the digital dagger, and followed Sarah into the clubhouse. Beige walls, beige chairs, beige souls pretending to enjoy civility. Brenda stood at the front, flanked by her 2 faithful clones, glowing under fluorescent light like idols of order. She didn't know it yet, but the empire she'd built on paper was about to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The Queen of Compliance was about to face her reckoning. And I, Frank Miller, ordinary homeowner, accidental broadcaster, was about to deliver it. The night of the meeting smelled like nerves and coffee. Pleasant Valley Meadows had never seen a turnout like this. Every parking spot was taken, every folding chair filled. Beige walls, beige people, beige tension. The room buzzed with the strange electricity of polite outrage barely held in check. At the front, under the harsh light of a single fluorescent fixture, stood Brenda Donaldson, still immaculate, still smiling, still convinced she was untouchable. Beside her, Brenda 2 and Brenda 3 arranged their papers in perfect symmetry. The 3 of them looked like a living brochure for control. I sat in the 3rd row, Sarah beside me. The USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than it should have, small, plastic, and capable of detonating the entire social order of Pleasant Valley Meadows. Around me, I could feel my neighbors' glances, curiosity from some, quiet encouragement from others. Even Dave from next door, usually invisible, caught my eye and gave a small nod. The meeting began the same way it always did, an ocean of tedium. Treasurer's report. Landscaping budget. The new mulch supplier's contract. Brenda's voice rolled on like beige wallpaper paste, soothing in its emptiness, hypnotic in its control. It was the perfect tactic. Drown everyone in boredom until resistance fell asleep. But tonight, no one was sleeping. When she finally reached new business, her eyes flicked toward me. Just a flicker, quick as a heartbeat, but there it was, a spark of awareness. As some of you may know, she said, her tone smooth and practiced, there has recently been misuse of public airwaves by one of our residents, resulting in division and immaturity unbecoming of Pleasant Valley Meadows. Therefore, the board proposes a new amendment, the prohibition of broadcast and public dissemination of association documents. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She paused, savoring the tension. This amendment will prevent residents from broadcasting or distributing our governing materials in any form, thus protecting their integrity. The trap was elegant. She was trying to outlaw my existence. Then she said the words I'd been waiting for. The board now opens the floor for comments. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and walked toward the single microphone set up for homeowners. The air felt heavy, thick with expectation. Brenda smiled her diplomatic smile. The board recognizes Frank Miller. My voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. Good evening, everyone, I began. I'd like to start by saying that reading this new rule aloud on my broadcast would probably break listener records. Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft, relieved, human. Brenda's smile stiffened, but I didn't give her time to recover. I agree with Brenda, I continued, my tone shifting from humor to measured gravity. We should all care about the standards that govern this community. I, for one, have learned them intimately. I reached into my jacket pocket and held up a stack of beige envelopes. These are my reminders of civic responsibility. This one for putting out the trash 10 minutes early. This one for a dandelion. This one for a crack in my driveway. People were smiling now, murmuring, recognizing their own scars and mine. And Brenda is right again. Rules are rules. They apply to everyone. I walked to the front, unplugged the HDMI cable from her laptop, and slid my own USB stick into the port. The projector flickered, the HOA budget disappearing, replaced by the first slide. A screenshot. The county building permit search for 45, Magnolia Court, Brenda's address. No permit found for any structural addition. This, I said evenly, is a record of building permits for our president's home. As you can see, no permit exists for the large deck built last summer. A gasp moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of her deck, glowing in the afternoon sun. The next slide, a close-up of the sealant brand printed on the railings. Then a zoomed section of the HOA bylaws. Appendix C, approved materials. The product name wasn't there. 2 violations, both hers. I let the silence hang, that deep, resonant silence that hums before something breaks. I've been held to the letter of the law, I said. So has Mr. Peterson, whose grass was once measured with a ruler. So has every person fined for being imperfectly beige. If the law matters, it must matter equally. The crowd was restless now, whispers swelling into voices. Brenda stood frozen behind the lectern, color draining from her face. Then Dave from next door stood up. His voice was steady, clear. I move for a vote of no confidence in our current HOA president based on evidence of willful violation of the bylaws. Seconded, shouted someone from the back, a voice trembling with excitement. What followed was chaos wrapped in procedure. Ballots passed out hastily, pens scratching, papers rustling. The beige veneer of order cracked wide open. Brenda tried to speak, but the microphone squealed, a perfect symbol of her authority slipping out of tune. Her clones exchanged panicked glances. The vote tally was brutal. A landslide. Brenda was out. Her 2 allies resigned before anyone could ask for their resignations. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in the cathartic noise of years of tension exhaled at once. People talked, laughed, clapped each other on the back. The dictator of Pleasant Valley Meadows was finished. I stood by the microphone, exhausted, half-numb. Sarah came forward and hugged me. "WHA," she whispered against my ear. The voice of the people. In that moment, under the flickering light of the clubhouse, the HOA wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a neighborhood again. Brenda gathered her papers silently, her hands trembling just enough to betray the storm behind her face. Without looking at anyone, she slipped out the side door and into the night. The queen of compliance had fallen. And for the first time in years, Pleasant Valley Meadows could breathe. The morning after the clubhouse coup, Pleasant Valley Meadows felt lighter. Not in any measurable way. The lawns were still manicured, the mailboxes still regulation height, the curbs still perfectly painted, but something invisible had shifted. The air no longer hummed with surveillance. For years, Brenda's presence had been like static in the background, the kind you didn't notice until it was gone. Now, in her absence, the silence was clean. I stepped outside with my coffee and found neighbors I'd only ever seen through blinds suddenly standing on driveways, waving, talking, laughing. It was like watching color return to an old photograph. Dave from next door ambled over, still looking half surprised by the idea that he was now president of the HOA. He scratched his neck, muttering about how he hadn't even wanted the job. But he was exactly what Pleasant Valley needed: calm, fair, unambitious. That first week, he called for an open community review of the bylaws, all 372 pages of them. It felt like the unsealing of ancient scrolls. People gathered in the clubhouse with coffee and highlighters. There was laughter, as residents read aloud the strangest clauses. The pot-bellied pig rule drew tears of disbelief. Someone taped a cartoon pig to the wall and crowned it, Article 4. What had once been fear was turning into humor. For the first time, the rules were no longer weapons. They were jokes, stories, lessons, the shared absurdity that bound everyone together. Over the next few weeks, the envelopes stopped coming. The golf cart patrols disappeared. The HOA office's phone line, once a hotline for complaints, started ringing with questions instead. Can I paint my shutters a little darker? Do we really need to pressure wash twice a year? And each time, Dave would sigh, grin, and say, let's be reasonable. The rebellion had done more than unseat a tyrant. It had humanized a system that had forgotten it served humans. One afternoon, Dave and two new committee members, a retired art teacher and a mild-mannered accountant, came over to my house. We sat in the backyard with iced tea, surrounded by the soft hum of late summer. The antenna still stood, proud and defiant, though now silent, a monument to the war that had ended. Dave gestured toward it. Look, Frank, he said, his tone kind but cautious, we're not going to make you take it down. What Brenda did was ridiculous. But is there any compromise you can live with? The words compromise and HOA rarely appeared in the same sentence. But I nodded. We looked through catalogs together, alternatives, designs, creative solutions. And there it was, a flagpole antenna. To the casual eye, it would look like a simple 20-foot flagpole. But inside, it was a perfectly tuned multi-band vertical antenna, hidden brilliance wrapped in normalcy. Dave smiled. Now that, he said, is harmony. The following Saturday, Sal's truck rumbled down the street again, its engine announcing him long before he appeared. He stepped out with his usual grin, wiping his hands on his jeans. Together, we installed the new antenna, disguised, beautiful, and perfectly legal. When it was done, Sal saluted it with a cold beer. Now you're part of the landscape, my friend. The new HOA, our HOA, even sent an email afterward. Thank you for your cooperation and creative solution. Approved and admired. The transformation was surreal. In the weeks that followed, Pleasant Valley meadows slowly came back to life. Lawns grew slightly uneven. Someone planted sunflowers without submitting a form. Kids chalked the sidewalks with dragons and stars. And nobody said a word. The rules still existed, but they'd lost their fangs. For the first time in years, Pleasant Valley felt like a neighborhood, not a museum. Each evening, I returned to my shack. The glow of my radio dials was no longer an act of rebellion, it was a connection again. When I keyed the mic and reached across the world, I didn't feel trapped anymore. I felt free. The revolution was over. But something inside me still hummed, a low steady signal waiting to be heard one last time. Because stories, like radio waves, never really vanish. They just travel beyond our reach, bouncing between hearts until they find a place to land. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or the heavy silence of defiance, but the peaceful kind. The kind you earn. Evenings in Pleasant Valley meadows had become different. The glow of porch lights spilled over uneven lawns. Laughter drifted down the street like music. Somewhere, someone grilled burgers without worrying about smoke dispersion limits. The world hadn't changed much. The same houses, the same driveways, the same old oak tree behind mine, but somehow everything was different. The rebellion was over, and for the first time, there was nothing left to fight. In the corner of my shack, the old FM transmitter sat exactly where I'd left it, a tiny black box surrounded by dust, its little LED still glowing faintly, as if waiting for my voice. I ran my fingers across its cool surface and smiled. It had started as an act of mischief, a desperate spark against an absurd machine. But it had become something else entirely. A connection. A mirror. A reminder that even in the smallest places, under the pettiest rules, people can still find a way to be heard. Outside, the flagpole antenna, the hidden masterpiece, shimmered in the dying light. The American flag flapped gently in the evening breeze, its edges catching gold from the setting sun. I sat down at the desk, switched on the radio, and listened. The static filled the room, soft, steady, alive. Beyond it were 1,000 unseen voices, crossing oceans and mountains, chasing each other through the ionosphere. I reached for the microphone. The ritual felt sacred now. One click, and the transmitter hummed to life. No intro music this time. No dramatic stings or orchestral thunder. Just me, my voice, and the low hiss of eternity in the background. "Good evening, Pleasant Valley Meadows," I said quietly. "This is WHA, the voice of the valley, signing on for one last time." I paused, breathing in the stillness. "We've shared some strange nights together, haven't we? Mailbox rules, lawn measurements, dandelion dramas. But what began as frustration turned into something better, understanding. We learned that even the dullest bylaws can sound like poetry if you read them with enough conviction." The microphone caught the soft laugh in my voice. "And we learned that even in the most ordinary neighborhoods, people can surprise you. They can stand up. They can change." I let the words hang in the air, drifting into the static. The HOA isn't perfect. Maybe it never will be. But it's ours now, not hers. And that makes all the difference. I glanced toward the window. The flag swayed gently in the twilight. The radio lights blinked like tiny stars. "So this is Frank Miller, signing off. Remember to check your bylaws, be kind to your neighbors, and for the love of all things beige, don't let anyone tell you your shade is too sunny." I smiled, the kind that comes from closure. This is WHA, clear and listening. My finger hovered for a heartbeat over the switch, then pressed down. The transmitter went dark. The room filled with a faint, peaceful hiss, the purest sound there is. Static. Freedom. Possibility. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Somewhere, on another frequency, another voice was speaking. Someone reaching out across the static to anyone who might be listening. The war was over. The rebellion had become legend. And Pleasant Valley Meadows, for the first time in its history, was simply home.